Question. Hello Kim, thank you for your content and all the work that you do. I have a question after watching your YouTube video on exposing the power elite. This is a video in my playlist about the next 12-year cycle, an opportunity for spiritual growth. If the leaders of large corporations, etc., exhibit toxic narcissistic behavior and control all the systems of power, HR, legal, etc., making it seem like every avenue for change is rigged against the individual, what can someone who recognizes this toxicity actually do? Is the only option to wait for the light to increase to a point where the scales just tip? Or are there practical steps one can take to address or navigate 2025 and beyond effectively? How can an individual create change or protect themselves? Well, there are a lot of things you can do when you are a spiritual person and recognize the spiritual reality. So let's say you're open to spiritual teachings, but you work in a corporate world, for example, and you see one of these situations. What you have to recognize first is that in many cases where you have a leader who's abusing power, for example, it's like there's a veil over the eyes of the people below that leader, and for that matter, the leader itself. The leader, they are so fixated on what they think is the right thing to do, and they're absolutely convinced that they are right, that they're not looking for any alternatives. They have set themselves and a company or even nations on a track, and they can't be flexible, they can't deviate from it. And this creates almost like a hypnotic effect. You saw it with Hitler, for example, how he hypnotized the people below him because they thought he was infallible. And it was really only when they lost the war that this veil was shattered. But what you can do as a spiritual person is you can do something to speed up the process of shattering this veil. And there are two things you can do. You can recognize that there's an energy component of everything. So a corporation, for example, a corporation has created, I have several videos where I talk about there's these entities or beasts in the subconscious mind that are almost like a computer program, but with some level of a survival instinct, so they want to pull people in order to steal people's energy. And a corporation creates something like this, a collective corporate entity that is based on a certain view of the corporation, and it pulls people in and it hypnotizes them. You want to see a practical example of what I'm talking about. There's actually a very old documentary about how Apple Computer got started. And there was the Xerox Corporation in the United States. They had a lab where they were experimenting with new technology. And they had come up with a computer mouse. And when they presented this to the executives of Xerox, they couldn't accept it. They thought it was completely ridiculous that Xerox, with all its dignified corporate image, should market a product called a mouse. It's just ridiculous. So that's what I'm saying. It's an example of how there's this corporate entity, this corporate consciousness that is like a hypnotic veil over people's minds. They can't see beyond it. They conform to it instead of questioning status quo. That's essentially what limits many corporations, because once you have created this, you can't innovate. You think there's only one way, and that is to protect your market share instead of coming up with new products that expand your market share. You see this in Xerox, then Apple Computer comes in, and they become a very innovative company. You can debate whether Apple has now gone into wanting to maintain market share rather than innovating, but because that's what happens to a lot of companies. So I'm just saying, there is this corporate entity. If you realize that as a spiritual person, you can use the calls to the Ascended Masters to call for this to be judged and to be dissolved by the energies of the Ascended Masters. You can invoke spiritual light into this. You can also call for the judgment of Christ upon this entity. You can even call for the judgment of Christ upon the leaders of a business which doesn't mean that you want to condemn them, but you want to give them an opportunity to see what they are not seeing right now, where they either accept the need for change or they reject it. You can also make the same kind of calls for people who are below the leaders, so that they come to see the limitations of the leader, and it eventually spreads. I'm not saying you should do this publicly or announce this to anybody, because they're going to think you're crazy, but this is something you can do. You can make the calls to dissolve the energies that are burdening the people in the company. And then, of course, you can work on your own psychology and ask yourself, why did I attract myself to this situation? Was it part of my individual life plan that I wanted to learn something here? And if so, what do I want to learn? What was it in my psychology that I wanted to see? So you can look at your reactionary patterns to a situation, to other people, and do everything you can to overcome those. And then, by this combined effort, you may come to a point where you've resolved your own psychology, you have made the calls for other people, where suddenly something shifts, and now there's an opening to bring forth a new idea, a new way of looking at things. It can be you who brings it forward, it can be somebody else. It can just be that there's a shift, and all of a sudden people become aware that market conditions have changed, and if we don't change, we're going to lose business. And then there's a shift. So all I'm trying to say here is that there are certainly things you can do if you're a spiritual person. If you're not a spiritual person, then there isn't anything you can do. So I think there's a lot of things you can do. How can an individual create change or protect themselves? Well, protecting yourself is invoking spiritual light from the Ascended Masters, but really in the long term, work on the psychology that makes you feel you need to be protected, that makes you feel you have to react to these conditions. Come to a point where you're not reacting, and where you can just be there and you're neutral. You don't have a reaction to anything. This can, incidentally, if you can achieve that state of neutrality, can also very well help the situation, because it can show other people that they can also be neutral and not have to react. You see, why is it that a tyrannical leader, for example, narcissistic leader, has power over people? Because the narcissist, whether they do this consciously or subconsciously, most of them is probably subconscious, they're tying into people's reactionary patterns, these subconscious selves. So they have discovered how to manipulate or intimidate people into submitting to their authority. And this is people's reactionary patterns. If you overcome your reactionary patterns, it doesn't mean you need to rebel against authority. That might not be constructive. But you can avoid reacting to it. You can show other people that you don't have to react to it. And quite frankly, if you come to a point where most of the people below a leader no longer react to the leader, it can be that the leader will change. Or maybe the leader will start acting out, becoming more extreme. So this becomes obvious, and then somebody, board of directors or whatever, changes the leader because they see this isn't working. But anyway, when you become neutral, you avoid being pulled into it, and therefore you can be in the situation and you can be at peace there. It can also very well be that if you and several other people can attain that state of neutrality, all of a sudden there can be a shift in the dialogue in the company, where you are now able to speak out about things in such a neutral way that it doesn't trigger other people the same way. So all of a sudden you can have a shift in the dialogue, a much more constructive dialogue, just because you and a few other people maybe are neutral, and you're not speaking out with this reactionary self that causes other people to react, and all of a sudden you have a spiral. Instead, you can just be neutral and say, but listen, this particular policy has these consequences. Is that what we really want? And this can also bring about a change. So I think there's many things you can do. But really, to me, the starting point is always, in any situation, what's my psychology? What can I learn? What do I need to see in myself so that I can become neutral about the situation? Because once you are neutral, you will see things that you can't see today. Because as long as you are trapped in this reactionary pattern, it blinds you. There are certain avenues you just can't see. Or if you see them, you don't think they're realistic. So once you attain that neutrality, all of a sudden you think, oh, what about this? Maybe if I did this, it would work. And then maybe it does actually work. And then you can create a more positive spiral.